Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I know it is just the beginning of Shabbat, but I want to speak for a moment about Havdalah, about what the ritual we so often do at the end of Shabbat. Havdalah is a brief service of separation. Many of us love it for its soothing music, for the sensory experience of smelling spices and tasting wine and looking at a beautifully braided candle. But the purpose of Havdalah is not for us to focus on the rituals, but rather for the rituals to focus us on something else, on what we should be holding on to and what we should be letting go of. Hamavdil bein kodesh lechol, we say. Hold on to the holy, hold on to the sacred, hold on to the eternal, to that which brings light, and let go of the ordinary, let go of the mundane, let go of the darkness. I'm not sure there has ever been a collective moment of Havdalah as awaited for, at least in our lives, as the moment we are in now, the moment of ending the year 2020 and beginning the year 2021. Oh, how desperately we have longed for this year to end and a new one to begin. But as I shared a few months ago at our religious New Year on Rosh Hashanah, we know that in fact the change from one year to the next does not wipe the slate clean in reality. COVID-19 will be here in 2021 just as it was in 2020, at least for the foreseeable future. Havdalah moments do not give us a clean slate or magically bring blessings into our lives. This is why Havdalah is so important. It is not about making a blessing in a moment. Havdalah is about taking advantage of a moment of transition. It's about stopping between two moments, between Shabbat and the week, between one year and the next, between the past and the future, in order to bring the best parts of what came before into what we hope to be the best parts of our future. And this week is not only the week that we finally turn the page from 2020 to 2021, it's also the week in which we conclude the book of Genesis and move from the story of Joseph into the story of Moses in the book of Exodus. In Joseph's dying words, he makes a rather strange request. He says to his children, "When you are able to go to the promised land, I want you to take my bones with you. Don't leave me in Egypt." And as unusual as that request might be, even more peculiar is that Moses, some 400 years later, follows through with that very promise. In the harried moments of leaving Egypt after the plagues and the many efforts to leave Pharaoh's slavery, we know that the Israelites packed quickly to start marching toward freedom. We eat that very matzah that we are told burned on their backs because they moved so quickly. But Exodus chapter 13 tells us that Moses stopped in the midst of all of the chaos to follow through on Joseph's request, to take the bones of Joseph on his back and to carry them to the promised land. One of my teachers asked us once to think about the imagery of the Israelites marching through the desert. And in one ark, they carry the broken tablets, and in the other ark, they carry the bones of Joseph. What could it have meant to them to carry these two pieces of their history with them into the future? And the commentators on the Exodus passage say that it was in that moment that while the Israelites were rushing around grabbing whatever they could, gold, silver, things of material value to take into their journey in the wilderness and to the promised land, that Moses was not interested in anything material, but rather stopped to grab the bones of Joseph because they represented mitzvot, the commandments, the values, the deeds that he wanted to remember to do in the future. So here we are, on the verge of leaving a dark year behind us, a year that perhaps enslaved us in ways, with no promises that the year ahead will be magically different. But the question of Havdalah is upon us. What is it that we will carry with us? What is the good that we will bring? What are the sacred pieces, the mitzvot, that we want to have on our backs as we move toward a better place? Officially, there are 613 mitzvot. We are lucky that Maimonides was kind enough to separate them into positive and negative and to give each one a number. And so yesterday, I looked through the list. And there are a lot of mitzvot that stand out as unique this year, as incredibly valuable. But I want to share just 4 that I think taught us the most and ones that I hope we hold on to tightest in the year to come. Perhaps the most obvious. Actually, it's a 2-for-1 deal this time. Mitzvot 297 and 298. Not to be idle when human life is in danger, and not to leave something behind that may cause harm. We often summarize these mitzvot by simply saying that we, the Jewish people, value the protection of life above all else. But this year, the words stand out differently. Of course we value life, but this year, it means much more to say the mitzvah exactly as it is written, to not be idle when human life is in danger, to leave nothing behind that could harm anyone. The mitzvah is not just about the value of life. It is about the way in which all of our lives are connected, even when we aren't in the same room. How can we not carry into 2021 the ways in which we could not be idle or indifferent? Wearing a mask perhaps being the most obvious, but there are thousands of others. Think of all the actions that we learned to take this year, the way we touch a doorknob or greet a stranger. I know it was sometimes hard to see through the cloud of confusion and distrust and all of the different messages that seem to be floating around in the universe, but for the most part, we became a society that took these mitzvot seriously. We recognized that every breath we take, that everything we touch, every place we go, all the people we interact with, that it impacts our world, not just us, that as much as we want to perhaps seclude ourselves into a bubble, there is no such thing, and that what we leave behind, that could be incredibly harmful to a stranger we do not know. And that is how we value life. I hope we bring that value into 2021 and well beyond the years of the pandemic. Mitzvah number 59. Sound the shofar when sacrifices are made during times of trouble. Yes, the sacrifices of Mitzvah 59 were originally animals placed on an altar. But in 2020, we became intensely aware of other types of sacrifices, of people who make sacrifices when times are troubling. A year ago, none of us knew what it meant to be an essential worker. But now, this past year taught us exactly who is essential. From nurses to food service workers to the delivery woman, 2020 screamed aloud all the people who truly make our lives livable. And now, as we watch the rollout of vaccines in 2021, we are reminded again, as these people are those to get the vaccine first and those we have to thank, for without their sacrifices, we would be unable to live our lives. Mitzvah number 208. Perhaps one that's not so obvious. Weights and scales must be accurate. For the Israelites, this meant that you had to be able to trust those who gave you goods or information. I'm not sure we mastered this one this year, but we certainly suffered the consequences of not knowing who to trust. The damage caused by misinformation was no less than life-threatening. And so I pray that we remember how important accurate information is, that we return to relying on science and research without the worry that leaders are putting their fingers on the scales, and that we know this applies not only to the scientific world, the medical world, but the justice system as well. We may not have embodied this mitzvah this year, but we suffered because of it, because it wasn't followed, and we know we can do better. And finally, I believe most importantly, in this moment of annual Havdalah, mitzvah number 46. that we are to never settle in Egypt ever again. The very most inspiring aspect of 2020 for me, the brightest light and often the source of my optimism, was that we kept moving forward even when there was no end in sight, that we knew we could not look back, that we could not get stuck in our misery or hopelessness, even though they were easy to call upon. And I certainly know that this was not always true for me or each of us in every moment. But overall, time and time again, we watched as people in the public eye and our neighbors, the people who share our homes with us, faced terrible times and kept moving forward. Nothing was more disturbing to me than the many people who cared for or lost a loved one over these socially distanced months. How incredibly unfair it was to not be with loved ones at the very moments when being with them was exactly what we wanted for them and for us. But time and time again, people moved forward. When they couldn't attend their own mother's funeral in person, they put on a tie and spoke to their family through Zoom. When they suffered day in and day out, unable to be at the bedside of their spouse in the hospital, they called constantly. They found ways to connect with the doctors and nurses to know that their loved one was being cared for. They advocated through the phone and email. They learned how to FaceTime with their devices, perhaps that they had never tried before. They did whatever they could to be there, when in fact the only thing they couldn't do was to be there. Not going back to Egypt is not a commandment about a country in the Middle East. It is a commandment about refusing to succumb to the will of the world around us when the world around us is dark. And time again in 2020, we pushed forward against unimaginable scenarios. What strength we showed. So let's carry that strength on our backs with pride and enthusiasm for what we can accomplish in 2021 and the years to come. Hamavdil bein kodesh l'chol, may this moment of transition open up our senses to the many achievements we have made in the past year, to the places where we became stronger, and to the mitzvot we learned from experience. And may the generations that follow not know of 2020 just as a year when we suffered, but as a year when we became stronger, so that their future could be brighter than our past. Shabbat Shalom. We turn now as we rise.